Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello, 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 and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. As always, yet another excellent episode of the show. Today, we're going to be speaking with Brien Foerster about the lost technology of Egypt, ancient Egypt. But Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. So, you know, the end of the year is coming up, and so you might want to get some insights into where to move forward for 2015. Not that I predict the future, but just saying, give me a call, send me a note. We can set up a time for a private consultation by phone, in person, and even via Skype. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. Well, you know, it's getting really close to Christmas, and so if you still are thinking of those special gifts that you can get for that special someone, especially if you maybe want to read it, my book, E.T. Chronicles, is available on Amazon.com. It's only like $13, so you can buy it, use it as a stocking stuffer for somebody else, and then read it yourself. And now if you do purchase it off of my website, soulhealer.com, it does come autographed, and that's priceless, which you obviously cannot get from Amazon.com. Anyway, trying to think if there's anything else exciting going on. Not really. You know, we're kind of winding up the year, but in 2 weeks, that's right, 2 weeks, we will be celebrating the beginning of our 8th year of air. Being on Just Energy Radio, and so that's going to be a very exciting show. That's about it. So let me tell you a little bit about Brien. So today we're going to be speaking about the lost technology of ancient Egypt, and to do that with us, we're going to be speaking with Brien Foerster. So let me tell you a little bit about Brien and get him on the air. Brien Foerster is the author of more than 15 books and has appeared multiple times on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens. He is also the assistant director of the Paracas History Museum in Paracas, south of Lima, and runs hidden Inca tours exploring ancient Peru and beyond. Brien resides in Peru with his wife when not exploring megalithic sites in Egypt with the Kemet School and other locations around the world. His websites are hiddenincatours.com and brienfoerster.com. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, my good friend, Brien Foerster. Hey, Brien, how's it going?
It's always a pleasure to be on with you, Dr. Rita, and it's been way too long.
Way too long, but you're here now, and it's all good. It's
excellent.
Great. It's great. You have just been a very busy boy, because the last time you were supposed to be on, which was, you know, over a year and a half ago, and we're not even going to go into the details of that. I think we were supposed to talk about this topic. Actually, I don't really remember what we were going to talk about, but I know that I have been wanting to talk to you about your exploits in Egypt because you've been there 4 times?
Actually,
now?
only twice, but the third one is coming up in March.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that a little bit in the second hour. So what do you think? In general, I mean, you live and go around to a whole bunch of ancient sites in Peru. Now you're having the opportunity to go to some very famous ancient sites of yet another culture. In general, what has been your impression going to Egypt once or twice?
Well, Egypt is so profound, and you can't really get a sense of the scale and level of craftsmanship unless you've physically been there, because photographs and videos and books are great, but to stand in front of something like the Great Pyramid, which is 500 feet tall, makes you feel like an ant.
And that's only one little thing there.
Oh, I know. The number of ancient sites up and down the Nile are numerous, and each one has its own distinctive character, and that's why when we do the tour, it's always 2 weeks, because we have to cover the famous and also some of the lesser known sites, which are as profound as, something like the Giza Plateau, which of course everybody on the planet has heard of.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like every day, well, maybe not every day, they are unearthing more and more material, different cities, different communities that they didn't even know about 50 years ago, 100 years ago. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, quite recently they discovered, supposedly a tomb containing, or tombs or a cemetery containing up to 1 million bodies or 1 million mummies. And, that's quite a recent discovery.
Was it like a mass burial, or was it more like a cemetery?
A cemetery, and from what little I've learned about it, it was like common people. It wasn't like pharaohs or whatever, but they have found some skeletons 2 meters tall, which, for those who don't know the metric system, that's about 7 feet. And some of them are blonde-haired and some are red-haired.
That's shocking.
Well, actually, it's part of the amazing thing about ancient Egypt or ancient Peru. There's so much more there that the average visitor doesn't see, and that's why I do my explorations, because it's almost endless, the mysteries that are being uncovered.
Well, I mean, there's Egypt. See, I'm waiting for you to go to Australia next. That's another amazing place to me.
Yeah, actually, we might be going in August, and you may have heard of the Gosford Glyphs.
Yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're going to, one of the things we're going to look at are these supposed hieroglyphics that were carved in the side of a huge rock just outside of Sydney. And that could blow open the doors of history yet once again.
I just think that it's interesting that with all of this material that's coming forward over the last, I'm going to say 20 years, I'm going to be very kind, 20 years, that scientists, researchers, historians that are in the mainstream aren't taking a step back and going, there's something else going on, there's something bigger going on that we need to take into consideration.
Well, in fact, at this point, the mainstream is being trodden over by all of the new information. They simply can't keep up with it. And thanks to the internet, we have the capability of transmitting video and audio and visual images of all these new discoveries. And either the mainstream catches up or we leave them behind.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a good thing. Also with things like CreateSpace and people being able to publish ebooks and other vehicles for getting their information out versus going through traditional channels, which is so finite. The number of books that actually get published through a mainstream publisher. And I'm not going to make any crass comment about that.
No, that's a great point, though, because things like ebooks and print on demand mean that the author is the editor, rather than having to having to submit something to somebody and then they can edit your work, that just, is not really a situation anymore.
Well, I mean, there is a certain amount of editing, like my E.T. Chronicles. I'm talking about Greek myth, and I said Hercules, and they corrected it to Heracles, which is actually correct, but not something that I would think about. And they did find a lot of typos and little stupid stuff. But all right, I'm just going to make my commentary here. With doing the radio show, I get a lot of people's books and read through a lot of books, and I find it interesting some of the junk that they do choose to publish.
Well, there is that as well.
And then there's stuff like my work and your work that they don't even want to touch. And it's like, wait a minute, my stuff is at least that good.
Well, it's one of those mixed blessings. Now anybody can write a book or anybody can make a music album. So you do have a lot of, I guess, what you could call junk out there. But, for those of us who are serious in terms of what we're doing, it means that our voice can be heard without somebody saying, well, wait a second, I have to have a transcript before before I can allow the audience to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm going to make a comment. That buzzing sound is happening again. So
is it?
Yeah. Anyway, we're just going to keep moving along.
Okay.
One of the things, and this is totally off topic of Egypt, but one of your newest toys, or I don't know if it's your toy, if this was someone else you were working with, is this new aerial camera thing. Talk about that a minute, because I watched your video and it was amazing.
Well, it's a quadcopter, which are becoming commonplace now. And I've been looking at them for about 2 years. And this guy came on tour with his wife about a week ago and bought me one, because you can't really buy them in Peru. In the United States, you can buy anything, which is great. So he brought it down with him, and he is a pilot and a helicopter pilot. So talk about the best person able to fly one of these things. And so we took it to one of the sacred sites in Peru, which is probably the video you saw. And then every day we went to other sites and simply asked the director of each site if we were allowed to fly. So we got to do famous sites like Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Pumapunku, Tiwanaku. So I have a pile of video just waiting to be made into video.
So I think we're all back.
Yeah. Well, welcome to international Skype connections.
Oh no, I got dumped too. So it wasn't personal, Brien.
Oh, thank God for that.
It's that buzzing. Everyone's going, it's the quadcopter. Actually, it's the cicada bugs. They're back for winter, just if you're all wondering. Okay, let's get on point. So I'm just going to talk about some of the stuff that really stuck out to me in your book. And for centuries, Egypt was a mystery until the discovery and the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone. And for the people that are listening that aren't familiar with what the Rosetta Stone is, and we're not talking about the Learn a Language software program, what was its contribution to our understanding of Egypt and Egyptian culture?
Well, the Rosetta Stone, of course, has, I believe, 3 different languages written on it. It has hieroglyphics, which is Egyptian. It also has Greek, and it has Coptic. And so when that was found, they were able to finally translate the Egyptian hieroglyphics into modern languages. The trouble is that, according to experts like Stephen Mailer, that level of understanding is only the superficial meaning of the hieroglyphics. And so the actual representations on the walls are far deeper and more complex than what most Egyptologists recognize.
So kind of like Laird Scranton's whole concept that the symbols actually represent something more than just a letter or a sound, but that there's actually an inherent meaning to the symbol.
Yeah, layers upon layers, depending upon your ability to comprehend ancient Egyptian.
You know, I have a video here. I guess you haven't seen it yet. Called Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of the Ancients. And it goes into this whole concept of when we have a symbol and we understand what the symbol means, and not just on the surface, that there's a whole story tied to it. And I think that, you know, that is part of it. And what's wonderful is that we have at least figured out what the symbols kind of mean in Egypt. Think about all the symbolism in Peru that we have no clue what half of it means.
Well, that's true. And the interesting thing about ancient Peru is that you don't find any depictions or written language at all. As we understand symbolism, what we do have, for example, is the Inca had a system called quipus, which were knotted cords. And so through that, it was not only a system of numbers, but recent studies have suggested that the numbers represent letters or even words. So Dr. I can't remember his name at Harvard right now, who's the expert, he believes that the Inca understood binary code.
That's really interesting. And I read somewhere that actually they use I can't ever say that word, in China. And they think that it was actually a common form of writing prior to writing around the world.
Well, one of the basic things is that even the most simple of symbols has so many layers of meaning that, you know, to some degree, we may never understand what these ancient people were thinking, because those levels of knowledge may have been lost forever. But you never know. Maybe through more and more study, we can decode, you know, more of this. And that's why when we get into things like when were certain things built, it becomes very intriguing, because conventional history is simply at this point not correct. We know certain structures were built long before the supposed rise of civilization 5,000 or 6,000 years ago.
Okay, well, let's just kind of take this apart. What leads you to believe that is not the case? That it wasn't, I mean, because they say that the pyramids, for example, were built in 2500 AD. So what leads you to believe that they were actually much older, or the monuments that are in Egypt are much older than that?
Well, the simple thing is that we know what tools the ancient Egyptians had. And in general, at best, they had bronze tools and stone hammers. And so when you see the level of precision of some of the structures in Egypt, it would be impossible for those tools to be used to create those structures. But more interestingly, we find obvious evidence of drills in hard stone and also giant saws at work. And so in order to cut through granite or basalt, the tool has to be harder than the material. So you're talking at least diamond technology, if not something even more profound.
What about, I was having a whole conversation about this last night, about the possible use, and this wasn't my idea, but I'm just going to throw it out there, the possible use of acids to cut the rocks.
Well, the thing is, when you see the drill holes, you see the actual spiral action of how the drill entered the stone. And that technology, as well as the obvious signs of the saw cutting, as in each revolution of the saw cut through so much material, that obviously you're looking at least 21st century technology existing thousands of years in the past.
Is what you're saying similar to you cut a piece of wood on, I'm just trying to think of like a piece of wood or piece of woodworking equipment that would leave some kind of marks, like a table saw or a chop saw, and you see those little kind of circular lines? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's exactly it.
Interesting. And I guess you cannot make something like that. Well, one with a copper chisel, but then there's the whole idea that they use some kind of hand saw with string and sand. I don't know. They make up so much good stuff that it's just amazing.
Well, that's the fun thing about our trips to Egypt, is that we almost always have a number of engineers and people like that with us who can recognize what machine technology looks like. So something like a handsaw, like somebody who's cutting through a piece of wood with a handsaw, they start very aggressively, and so they're cutting deep into the wood, and then after a while your arm gets tired and the saw moves less and less, and so by the time you've cut that piece in half, you can see the pattern of the cut, and it's irregular because it's been done with human power. But when you see the evidence that we see in Egypt, it's very even. So obviously whatever technology was at work was under some kind of power, as in machine power, not human power.
Based on the tool marks that you're seeing, has the concept of using lasers been ruled out?
Yes, lasers have been ruled out, and actually Chris Dunn, the engineer and the author of the Giza power plant, showed that, because on an episode of Ancient Aliens, in his the business he was working in, he took a piece of stone, he cut it with an angle grinder, and then he cut it with a laser, and the laser simply melted it, almost like melting plastic. So lasers are not a technology used to cut stone. They're great at cutting steel, but not stone.
Well, that just makes me think of something different. Could that kind of technology have been used to build a site like Sacsayhuaman, where we have all of these intricate parts, where it would be kind of nice if it melted and you just stuck it in place to wherever it needed to go?
Well, that's what's really interesting, is that the workmanship we see in Peru and the workmanship we see in Egypt are equally as complex, but different technologies were at work. The stuff in Egypt is actually quite obvious because, again, we see the tool marks, but in Peru, and the example you gave of Sacsayhuaman, it is literally like they were converting giant chunks of stone and converting them into marshmallows temporarily and sticking them together. That's the closest analogy I can come up with. It's, that the technology at work in Peru is far more bizarre than that in Egypt.
Without a doubt. Because it seems like in Egypt there's a lot of square blocks, straight line square blocks, where in Peru they're all over the place.
Yeah, the stuff in Egypt tends to be really linear or straight, and in that way you can see the accuracy by putting something like a steel ruler against it. But in Peru, most of the workmanship is very organic. Again, the example of Sacsayhuaman, you have thousands of stones, some of them 125 tons, and each one is a very distinct shape and size, which any stonemason who looks at it just says, I don't understand why these people would have done that. It's just overdone.
Do you think that the building in Sacsayhuaman is actually older than what's in Peru?
Well, as in compared to Egypt?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there. Yeah.
Well, I think the commonality we're looking at is we're looking at a pre-cataclysmic work. And by that, I mean that we know scientifically that there was a massive devastation event that happened on the planet about 11,700 years ago. And these structures seem to predate that. And of course, I think you've interviewed Dr. Robert Schoch probably about that topic. Mm-hmm. But that's what we're looking at, and that's what is the key. Again, conventional history tells us that sophisticated humanity is 5,000 or 6,000 years old, but what they don't take into account is this cataclysmic event which devastated many parts of the planet, and so these stone structures may be the only remnants we have of supercultures that existed prior to 12,000 years ago.
And I think where part of the problem also runs into, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that in Egypt in particular, it was common practice for the different pharaohs to white out somebody else's name or take something that was unmarked and stick their name on and say, "Oh yeah, I did this."
Well, exactly, and that's evident when you visit Egypt and you see some of the walls. You'll see that one pharaoh would scratch a previous pharaoh's work out, or would dig his hieroglyphics deeper into the surface. Ramses II is probably the most classic of that. Some of his hieroglyphics are an inch carved into the stone to make sure that people who came after him couldn't carve his name out.
Is it really that obvious that they were putting their name over the top of someone else's?
Oh yeah. Again, if you visit Egypt, we can show you multiple examples of that kind of thing.
Well, that's, because you hear that, or I've heard that, but I could never figure out how it wouldn't be kind of obvious that there was a correction that happened.
Well, it is really that obvious. And then, of course, afterwards, you have the Greeks came and they did some devastating work. The Romans were terrible at dismantling things and reconstructing their own temples out of older temples. And then you have the Islamic people coming in, and then modern history with devastation. So it's amazing that there's anything left in Egypt as the result of one culture, taking over and crushing a previous culture.
But one of the things that's really cool is that throughout time, it was always seen, that whole region was always seen with this eye of magnificence. And it wasn't totally deconstructed, and it was left there and preserved.
Well, yeah, we're very fortunate, especially that structures like the Great Pyramid and other pyramids are still there, that they weren't totally taken apart. And some of the other intriguing things which are actually underground, luckily they were preserved because, they had been abandoned, and then the sands of the Sahara would come in and fill things in. And so not until the 19th century were these things rediscovered. And, thank God for the sands of the Sahara for preserving a lot of this, world heritage.
Exactly. If you were to put an estimate on how many different major locations there are in Egypt, because people, are familiar with the Giza Plateau where the Great Pyramids are, and they maybe have heard of Saqqara or Abydos, but how many different major locations are we talking about? Roughly.
Well, in terms of number, I would say between 10 and 20, all the way from the very southern part of Egypt at Aswan, all the way to the Mediterranean. So that's why any trip to Egypt, if you're only going to go once, I would do the entire thing and go from Aswan all the way up to Alexandria, because there's so much there.
And as you go from location to location, do you find, I'm going to say, the same level of technology or evidence of pieces of that technology from site to site?
Not so much. It's really the area which Stephen Mailer, who, again, you've had on before, and his mentor, Abdel Hakim Awian, called Bu Wizir, which translates as being the land of Osiris. And that is more or less the Giza Plateau, I would say plus or minus about 50 kilometers maximum. That's where we find the majority of the most ancient, intriguing examples of lost ancient high technology that was adopted by the what we call the dynastic Egyptians.
Interesting. So, all right. We get talking and then my mind gets thinking, and it's like, no, stop thinking. Just move along. So we're talking about an area. All right, we have the Great Pyramid, and then we have pyramids like the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, et cetera, are they also in this region of Egypt, or are they more spread out?
No, you're right. I mean, that's the area called Dashur, where you find the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, and then also Saqqara, where you have what's called the Serapeum, which is this underground tunnel system with these 100-ton boxes in it. It's that general area which, to me, is the most intriguing. But also at Aswan, which is in the very southern part, that's where we have the big granite quarry, and that's where we find the 1,200-ton unfinished obelisk and obvious examples of some kind of lost ancient technology used to try to cut that from the bedrock itself.
And I think that is amazing. In that location, do you believe that that's where they did their primary quarrying for these other locations?
Yeah, it seems that most of the red sandstone that you find, red granite that you find in many places, like inside the Great Pyramid, there are these massive slabs of red rose granite, and in many other places, that the Aswan Quarry, which is 500 miles away from Giza, that's where all or most of the red granite was carved from. So then, of course, you get into the question of how did they cut it, how did they transport it, how did they shape it, how did they finish it, how did they put it into place, etc., etc.
I don't know. And then how did they carve it to such precision, too? There's the shaping of the stones and, how they're nice and square, but then there's actually the carving of the hieroglyphs on some of them that is amazing.
Well, that's true. And again, I go back to people will have to look it up on the internet, and that's the Serapeum, Serapeum. Serapeum. And Chris Dunn was in there with his machine tools, as in straight edges or rulers, which are accurate within 2/10,000ths of an inch. And that's how perfect these surfaces are. They're as flat as 2/10,000ths of an inch of being away from being laser perfect. And you couldn't do that with bronze chisels and stone hammers.
And the other question is, why would you want to?
Why
would you need for it to be so accurate for?
Well, you wouldn't. You in the 21st century, you need that in some applications, like in avionics or jet engine parts or something like that, or something NASA would have designed. But in ancient Egypt, what would be the point in having a level of accuracy like that? And so that gives us another indication that the dynastic Egyptians didn't make this stuff; they simply inherited it from a much older culture.
I mean, especially the stuff in the Serapeum, because don't the, I'm going to say, boxes that are down there, didn't they claim that the Apis bull was mummified and buried in these giant coffin-looking things?
Well, they did, but there's no evidence of any mummies or bones or skin or whatever of any bulls being in there. And that, again, is one of the fallacies of some of the Egyptologists. They can't tell you how the box was made, which is the most important point, let alone what it was used for. These things, again, they're huge. The box itself, each box is 70 tons. The lid is 20 to 30 tons. They hermetically seal themselves. They fit so perfectly together. And the lid and the box are always made from the same piece of stone. So
get out of town.
Well,
like
no, it's true.
They just slice a piece of butter off the top and carve the inside out and put the piece of butter back on there.
Yeah, and they're so highly polished that the lid is a perfect fit to the box, And that's what's so intriguing. The other thing is, how do they transport the stone from Aswan? And then how did they get it into the tunnel? Because these boxes could barely fit around the corners. That, to me, is the most surreal place on the planet. It's almost like from a science fiction film, and you expect, like a huge alien body to climb out of one of these things. It's that weird.
Has anybody ever climbed inside one of the boxes?
One of them's
unofficially
broke. Well, you actually can, because one of them's broken quite badly. The front end was broken off because some idiot decided, and I think he was an archaeologist, decided to use dynamite to to see what was inside the boxes, because they couldn't
move the lid.
Exactly. So one of them's broken open, and in that one, you're able to go in, if you get permission, with a precision ruler, stick it up against the side of the wall, and no light appears between the ruler and the surface of the stone. It's that good.
Is it finished as accurately on the inside as it is on the outside?
Some of them. That's the other strange thing is some appear to be unfinished, at least on the outside, and others are perfectly finished. So it seems like the final work had to have been done inside this tunnel. And then the problem is, how would you light the tunnel in order to be able to see what you're doing? Because there's no evidence of soot or smoke on the ceiling. So what kind of lighting technology was involved way back in time, long before Edison and the light bulb?
They're asking like a million questions in the chat room, but we're just going to keep moving along. I know that in the Great Pyramid, a lot of people will go in there and tone or chant or do different acoustic type work because they claim it's a resonance chamber. In the Serapeum, has anybody tried doing something like that as well?
Inside one of the boxes, yeah. I mean, the Serapeum tunnel itself is limestone, which is not very acoustic. But the interior of the especially the King's Chamber, which is lined in granite, it is incredibly acoustic, and it responds to one specific tone much more than any other. And if you get the great opportunity to climb inside the box, the so-called sarcophagus, which is inside the King's Chamber, and people tone and hit the right tone in the room, that vibration goes straight through your body. It's an incredible experience.
I will guess you've had that experience, Brien.
Twice. And in March, 3 times.
Well, cool. From an alternative perspective, have you heard of any beliefs, or has anybody thrown out any ideas of what the Serapeum was used for?
There are many, not many, there are a few different theories. I think probably the most logical theory is that the Great Pyramids, like all 3 of them, as well as the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid and a few others, but not many others, were all part of a giant energetic system. And I don't necessarily mean electricity, but some kind of acoustic vibratory energy was produced inside of these giant pyramids. But what's more intriguing is that below the pyramids are a series of tunnels that interconnect with them. And so water used to run through this labyrinth system of tunnels under the Giza Plateau, and that may have produced the vibration that triggered or made these pyramids function as vibratory auditory structures, again, thousands of years before the existence of the dynastic Egyptians.
It's just amazing. Let's talk about some of the other pyramids. I think people have seen lots of pictures of the inside of the Great Pyramid. But in your book, the lost ancient technology of Egypt. You have some pictures of, and I wrote it down. Hang on a second. Well, I think there were some pictures of like the Red Pyramid, and if I could read my own handwriting, it would.
What is it? Hieroglyphics?
Just about, and there's so many symbols in here that. But anyway, let's just start with the Red Pyramid. There was another one also, but what I thought was interesting is there's a general claim that the pyramids were burial structures, but when you look at other burial sites, like in the Valley of the Kings or some of the other locations, they're always filled with a bunch of hieroglyphs, except for the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. But what I noticed in your book was that in these other pyramids that you investigated, also no hieroglyphs.
None. And not only that, the shape of the, especially in the Red Pyramid, which you can go in, it's the chambers aren't like these big open cubes. They actually taper as they go up. And those seem to be acoustic in nature. So again, each one of the chambers inside the three main pyramids on the Giza Plateau and the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid, they seem to be acoustic in nature. The chambers seem to have been designed specifically, each one for a particular tone, and each pyramid seems to have had a specific function. That's why each one is a different shape and size. And that's also why the Bent Pyramid was not a technical mistake, as some academics believe. It was designed on purpose to perform a specific function.
Kind of like a B flat.
Well, actually, it was Buckminster Fuller, the famous Canadian designer guy, who looked at it, and he said, those two angles are on purpose. And when you take the name of the Bent Pyramid, which I temporarily have forgotten, at least the Egyptian part of it, but when you translate it, the name could mean double harmony. And that is why it has the two angles, because it had two harmonic functions.
Very interesting. See, now that then it just brings up this whole, why would they use resonance and sound, and what were they either generating from it or producing with it? Because that just kind of adds in a whole other dimension, and it's a dimension that we don't really have the access of knowledge yet. We don't really work with vibration and sound per se in doing stuff on the planet. Really. No,
well, exactly, and that's the intriguing thing. You're probably looking at structures that were built by cultures that were smarter and more sophisticated than what we are, which most people simply won't accept. But we see the evidence in Egypt and in Peru that whoever did this work had forms of technology we don't have.
And they were eco-friendly.
Exactly. Everything they designed worked with nature. They didn't impose the way we do. We build stupid things like nuclear power plants and try to harness the universe, which is impossible. But what they did is they knew how nature and physical forces, I won't call them laws, but how physical forces worked. And thereby they were able to build these incredible structures to function in amazing ways that we are trying to figure out in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we will ever get back to that place. I mean, unless we had some kind of massive paradigm change that would take us out of this external materialistic thing. When I think of resonance and vibration, I think of energy, and I think of energy medicine and intention and using intention to create. And it would be really cool if that's what these things were like giant manifesting machines or something.
Well, I think, when you get into people like Tesla rediscovered stuff. I don't think he invented what he was working at. He was rediscovering ancient knowledge. And of course, that's why he was shut down or killed or whatever. And the same thing with, with some people now who are working on the concept of free energy or 0-point energy, they're trying to rediscover something that ancient people knew how to work with very efficiently. And the work that is being done to figure out how these ancient structures worked could be very beneficial to us in this century, if we're smart.
But then again, it's not like they had a blender that they needed to power. So if these things were some kind of energy generators, what were they generating the energy for? Or were they working in some other way that we're not even looking at?
I think that's exactly what they were doing. I think that they were possibly setting up some kind of, you could even call it a force field or a vibratory area where they were able to access levels of reality that we don't comprehend. I think they were, whoever they were existing way beyond the 6 senses that we have. And even the Kemet school talk about ancient people having 360 senses, and now here we are down to 5, or some of us are blessed with 6 of them. But again, you're looking at what we often talk of the golden age of humanity, where people had incredible abilities, which hopefully will have the capability of try to relearn and reignite for the betterment of ourselves and our future generations.
There were a bunch of questions in the chat room. Let me hit you up with a couple of them. So one person asked, and I think it was Canoe, now that you've seen the Sphinx, there's the whole controversy that the head has been recarved. If you were to pick, if you believe that that's the case, what do you think the original head was?
The head was definitely recarved. I can say that with 100% security, because I'm actually a sculptor. I've been a sculptor since I was a kid. And so when you look at the Sphinx, the erosion of the body is far more in excess of that of the head. And so the head was definitely recarved during dynastic times, because one of the pharaohs either wanted himself depicted on it or maybe his mom. And originally, according to Stephen Mailer and others, the Sphinx was a lion. The head was that of a lion, not a human being.
What of the concept of a jackal? I mean, that's the other one that I've heard.
I've heard that, but personally I don't believe that. I think it was a lion, because the lion is a very powerful symbol in terms of the matriarchal nature of the dynastic and pre-dynastic people. They were not, contrary to what some people think, and this is very controversial, but the Kemet school believed that the pharaohs were not men, they were actually the women. The man was simply the one who spoke, but the power was the woman, because the woman carried the bloodline. So pharaoh comes from the word per'ah, which means the high house, and the high house was the woman.
Well, it's like that in Native American cultures. Even though there's the chief, the women are running everything.
Well, exactly, but I think more properly, ancient cultures were balanced. The masculine and feminine were in harmony, so they weren't in this silly state we're in, and hopefully we'll get out of this patriarchal stupidity of where men think they're running the world, but in fact they're driving the planet into complete disaster. We need to return to a proper sense of harmony where the feminine is at least in balance with the masculine.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. If you've asked a question I haven't asked it, please don't hate me. And this is from Bill in New York, and he says, why hasn't any physical evidence of this technology been discovered during archaeological exploration?
Well, the answer to that is it could very well have been. They could have found the parts of machines. However, due to the somewhat narrow-mindedness of how some Egyptologists work, anything that didn't fit their paradigm would immediately be hidden in a warehouse, just like in Indiana Jones, where the Ark of the Covenant is stuck in a box, a number's put on it, and it's shoved away so that nobody can ever get at it. I think that's one answer. The other answer, which is a little more extreme, is that whoever built these structures came their tools with them.
Okay, so elaborate. These people that came, like who?
Well, at this point, I honestly don't know, but I'm open to the idea that some of these structures may have been built by people who are not from this planet. That's going out on a limb, but I'm open to the possibility, because the level of technology, the size of the constructions are just so profound. Again, if you see them in person, that I find it very difficult to think that human beings, ancient human beings were capable. But if it was done by ancient human beings, then they would have lived prior to the cataclysm, and then most of their knowledge and tools and toys and whatever would have been destroyed during this cataclysmic event around 11,700 years ago.
Woohoo! He's turned to the dark side.
No, I just want to keep an open mind on all this stuff.
Well, no, and I completely agree about the open mind, but then you get to the point where the preponderance of evidence just makes you go, I can't just rule that possibility out anymore.
No, and the thing is, the closer you look at a multitude of sites in Egypt, there's one called Abu Sir, another Abu Ghurab, and on the Giza Plateau, people have to understand that this area is huge in scale. It's not just three pyramids stuck together. It's huge, but you don't see 10 examples of core drill holes in super hard stone or saw marks. They are all over the place, and that's why I have to go back at least once a year, because I know there's so much waiting for me still to find for myself.
All right, I'm making a note. All right. Okay, I'm just trying to get through a couple of these questions. And so this is from American Road Warrior. Were the Giza pyramids sealed permanently, or did they have functioning doors?
That's a great question. One would think that there would have to be access to them. If they were functional machines of some kind, they would have to have access in order for the Maytag repairman to go in and do the repair job. But the question is where. There are theories that there are entrances into the Great Pyramid, for example, that have not been found so far. It could have been through the vertical or the angled shafts going up. But that's a very intriguing question, and something that I will definitely look at when I go back in March.
I know that in Mexico, in the Mayan culture and some of the other Mesoamerican cultures, and I'm not sure about in Peru because there aren't really a lot of pyramids. There have been structures that are built on top of structures that are built on top of structures. Is there any indication in the Giza pyramids that there might have actually been a smaller pyramid at one point in time? And the reason I'm going there is there are the shafts that go up, and then they found the wall, and then they found a separation before they hit another wall in going up the shaft. And is there a possibility that there was an existing pyramid that was built on top of?
I doubt that. That's much more common in places like Mexico, especially if you go to Chichen Itza. You see definite evidence that there's an original structure and then a larger structure is built on top of it. In Peru, you see a lot of examples of that, where you have this super ancient small area, and then you have other stuff that's been built around it by the Inca. And actually, Machu Picchu is a classic example of that. The little core area of Machu Picchu, where the famous hitching post of the sun is ancient megalithic, and then the Inca built their city around that. But in Egypt, it's more that you had these, again, pre-cataclysmic structures, and then the dynastic Egyptians move into the area and find them, and then rename them, and then build all their stuff around it. And for the average person, it's a confusing mess, or they think it's all built by the same people. But the closer you look at it, you see definite differences between dynastic work, pre-dynastic work, stuff done by the Greeks and the Romans, etc.
While you were there, did you have an opportunity to see any skeletons and look for elongated heads or anything good like that?
Yeah, actually, Stephen Mailer insisted that we go into the room of mummies in the Cairo Museum, where they have a display of the Amarna family, of which Akhenaten is the most famous, and Nefertiti. And so he kind of insisted that I look at their heads and see if they were different, and they somewhat are different than an average human skull, but nothing like the elongated skulls of Peru, for example. The conehead ones. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that the depictions of Akhenaten and Nefertiti and their children. Those are artistic depictions. Their skeletons have never been found, so we don't know what they would have looked like. But that's another intriguing thing that we have to look at.
Well, I mean, supposedly, based on Akhenaten's skeleton, that the depictions of him were supposed to be fairly realistic, and that he did have, I'm going to say, a really big butt. Because he has that just very odd figure shape.
Yeah.
Did his skeleton look that way?
Well, there are claims that his skeleton have been found, but that hasn't been proven through DNA testing. Some people think that Nefertiti's been found, but that hasn't been proven with DNA testing. The more likely thing that happened to the Amarna family is that because he was so much of a so-called heretic, whereas in fact I think he was a great hero, that the priesthood were very jealous of his power, and so they decided to murder the entire family and cut their bodies up and basically spread them to the winds so that symbolically they could never come back to a new life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there are some new theories that I've heard that actually Akhenaten was Moses. So, so you wouldn't find his body because he left.
Yeah, actually, that's the subject of Stephen Mailer's second book, From Light into Darkness, which is a great read if you haven't read it. It's a brilliant book.
Well, anyway, the music is going to come up, so we need to go to our break. So I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Brien Foerster about his book, Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt, and we'll be back with Brien after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Are you looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry. IRN's new interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN chat lounge, the game lounge, video lounge, or the mood lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless. Use your time wisely, keeping it all on IRN.
Who were the gods of antiquity? They've been described as the forces of nature, levels of consciousness, and aspects of our psyche. Stories that depict their incredible weapons, their flying machines, and their amazing adventures are characterized as being the product of our ancestors' fanciful imaginations. But what if the tales of the gods are true? Did the writers, chroniclers, and scribes of our distant past actually document a realistic view of our origin? My latest book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, looks at our most ancient legends. Learn of the torrid romances, elaborate plots, violent scandals, and conspiracies that played out in antiquity. Find out the role the gods played in the life and culture we have today. If you want to find out the truth of who we are and where we come from, order your copy of Man-Made today. For more information, go to www.manmadethechronicles.com. That's www.manmadethechronicles.com.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Move past the crossroads in your life and discover alternative solutions to your deepest concerns at soulhealer.com. So whether it's a physical problem, an emotional issue, a question about work, or troubles in your relationships, naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise can help you. Bring peace, harmony, and health back into your life. Schedule a session today. Visit soulhealer.com right away and live the life you've been dreaming of.
You didn't forget what's coming up tonight, did you? Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Never miss that interview you were looking forward to or the show on your favorite topic. Follow IRN on Twitter, I_R_N, and get reminders about the evening's live shows as well as fun and important updates throughout the week. That's I_R_N, and never miss a great show again.
We only have a couple of seconds before we have to get back to the show, and I want to tell you how you can jumpstart your intuition today. Using my free 50-page introductory guide filled with simple, revolutionary, and proven techniques, you can ignite your intuition and tap into your inner wisdom, all from the comfort of your own home. The Institute of Applied Energetics is the leader in online home study instruction for those interested in becoming a certified medical intuitive, intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner. Now is the time to transform your life and take it to a completely new level. Discover who you are and how you work. Open the door to the world of intuition, health, and healing. You can jumpstart your intuition right away by going to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and downloading our free guide. Get the opportunity of a lifetime and live the life you deserve. Download your free Jumpstart Your Intuition guide today at www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and begin living a life filled with passion and purpose.
Have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Go deep inside yourself and venture into the realm of the unconscious mind with my Meditating on the Kabbalah guided imagery audio CDs. Discover who you are and what you want in life. Meditating on the Kabbalah can help you to open, clear, and revitalize the energetic pathways of your subtle being. They will support you in your spiritual quest by helping you to access the profound insights and inner guidance you need as you work in alignment with your highest good. Let them help you to release negative thoughts and emotions and clear away any limitations that may be keeping you from experiencing your full potential. Walk down the path to health, healing, understanding, and enlightenment with meditating on the Kabbalah. Order your copy today at www.soulhealer.com. That's right, that's www.soulhealer.com.
Hello, Inception Radio Network. Would you like your favorite show to be played again live on air? Well, now the choice is in your hands with IRN's live request portal, an easy way to request your favorite show with a simple click. IRN's live request portal now gives you exclusive access to all the shows. How easy is it? Simply type a show name or a guest name, click request, even write a dedication message, and that's it. Try it now. Simply visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com, click on the live request tab under the show menu. Now playing your favorite show is just a mouse click away.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the show. We're continuing our conversation with Brien Foerster. His website is brienfoerster.com and hiddenincatours.com. We're talking about his book, The Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt. Brien, one of the things that I've seen it come out of Egypt that people don't really talk about are these bowls and cruets and other, things that you would have in your house. I don't want to say plates, but bowls and canisters that are amazing, and even in the pictures, they look amazing as far as the quality of workmanship that has gone into them. Have you seen some of these things, and what's your opinion on them?
Yeah, I've seen many of them. There was a cache of 30,000 of them were found at Saqqara. 30,000. Yep, they were found all piled together, I think in a tunnel or chamber, and some of them are made out of diorite, which is an incredibly hard stone, harder than granite. Others are made out of basalt, which is an incredibly hard stone. And having been a woodworker and worked with stone and stuff like that most of my life, those could only have been made on a lathe running probably at high speed, and the only tools that could possibly cut those bowls so finely and so thinly would have to have been tipped either with diamonds or with some other super hard material, which again the dynastic Egyptians did not have. So again, we're looking at examples of lost ancient high technology.
I'm still stuck with this cache of 30,000 pieces that were found in a tunnel. Let me ask a couple of questions, and hopefully you know the answers to my millions of questions. Were they in a tunnel, and were they buried in the tunnel? I mean, not necessarily intentionally buried, but buried by sediment in this tunnel?
No, they seem to have been buried on purpose, as if, my assumption is that they didn't fit with a certain paradigm, and so they were kind of either stuffed away to be lost to history, or that they were buried on purpose so that they wouldn't be discovered.
How long ago did they find these things?
The unfortunate thing is that I think in the 1930s.
So why not? It's not a recent find.
No, they were buried probably at least a couple of thousand years ago, if not more.
I mean, my question, where I'm going in my mind is, when they were pulling these things out, were they able to date the sediment that they were buried with to get an idea of how long ago they were actually interred? That was where I was going.
Well, if they were found in the 1930s or before, and I think they were, and I think it was Walter Emery who found them, that was before carbon-14 testing existed, because that science of radiocarbon testing, I believe, was more or less founded and not even perfected in the 1940s or 1950s. They could, of course, go back and test some of the sediment today, but there might be some resistance from certain academics if, again, they don't fit the paradigm of conventional Egyptian history.
How do you hide 30,000 pieces? That's that's a lot. That's like a huge yard sale. Huge.
Well, or the size of a, like a coffee cup or a cereal bowl. Or again, the tunnel and cavern and system underneath the Giza plateau area is much more extensive than most people realize. I've actually been 3 layers down below the Giza plateau in the tunnels, and that's something that obviously the average tourist never sees, but they are there because I've been there.
And where were these things found in relationship to this circle of antiquity that we've been talking about?
Well, as far as I know, they were found at Saqqara, which is a huge archaeological site, and I think they were found near what's called the Dozer Pyramid, which is a step pyramid. Mm-hmm. So actually, the funny thing is that when we went there last March, behind one of the buildings, which you're not technically supposed to go, we saw some that were the size of something you would plant almost like a small palm tree in, just kind of scattered in a pile. And the weird thing is, why aren't these very important artifacts, A, in the museum, and B, why are they just lying out behind some building? It could be that they don't fit the conventional paradigm, and therefore some people don't want them to be known about.
Mm-hmm. Have you been in the step pyramid?
No, I haven't. It's under they're reconstructing it right now, and it's not that impressive. Realize is that the magnificent pyramids like the Bent, the Red, the Great Pyramid, and the other two on the Giza Plateau are profoundly well made, whereas the dynastic Egyptians did build pyramids, but they tended to make them out of mud brick or much more crudely than the famous ones that we all know about.
And my curiosity was, were there hieroglyphs in that? Because according to Egyptologists, isn't that one of the very first pyramids that were built, quote unquote?
Well, that's the funny thing. It's most likely that they have the whole thing backwards. That again, the dynastic Egyptians showed up around 5,000 years ago. They moved into the area of what we call dynastic Egypt, as in the Nile, etc., and that they found that there were these giant structures there, as in the Great Pyramid. So what they did is they decided that they wanted to try to build some, but they never achieved the size. They never achieved the level of technical superiority, and so they experimented. And I think the Step Pyramid is an example of a recreation of one of the Great Pyramids. And so I think the academics have the whole thing backwards. Is that the Great Pyramids were there, and then the dynastic Egyptians tried to replicate them, but were not able to do a very good job. And that's why they're all falling apart, except, the famous pyramids we know about.
Amazing. The schist disc, I think I'm saying that right, was that part of this find?
I think it was. Yeah.
And for the people that are listening that aren't familiar with what that is, can you give them a general explanation? Obviously, a picture would be way better, but we're on radio. But the best you can explain it, and really the significance, to me, that piece is very significant.
It is. Well, it's called the schist disc because it's made of a type of stone which is called schist, and it's compressed, dense layers of stone, and it has these weird fins coming off of it. Again, unfortunately, it's broken, and they've tried to rebuild it quite badly. But it's this beautiful bowl shape with these fins coming off of it, all made of one piece of stone. And any engineer that I've been with that's looked at it definitely thinks that it was some part of a machine, possibly for the movement of air or the movement of water. But that, again, is an example, possibly, of part of the machinery of the lost ancient technology.
I mean, I can't even figure out what they would say the Egyptians would have used this thing for, because it looks like a propeller from a boat or something like that.
Well, the conventional story is that it's either a lotus bowl or a fancy fruit plate.
Okay, so if you could see the look on my face going, huh? Or it looks like there's some kind of an axle or a rod that's supposed to go through the center of it.
Yep.
Like, okay. Okay. They come up with some of this stuff, and it just makes me laugh. I can't imagine going on a tour and they take you to these things and they go, and this is the schist disc, and this was a fruit bowl. I think I would have to laugh out loud, like right in their face, because it's just so absurd.
Well, it is, and that's why, one of the main reasons we do the tour is not simply to do a tour, is because we tend to get people like engineers and geologists come with us, and so we simply turn to them and say, what do you think that was? Or what kind of stone is that? And we get the inside information from experts, where unfortunately some academics who are in a specific field of archaeology seem to have a tendency not to ask engineers and stonemasons and physicists and other professionals what their opinion is of some of this stuff that they can't properly explain, aside from calling something a fruit bowl.
Right. How big is this thing? I mean, if it's a fruit bowl, are we talking it's, 18 inches in diameter? And I'm being really generous here.
No, it is. It is. I think it's about 18 to 20 inches in diameter.
Oh, so it's actually really not that big. The images make it look like it's rather large.
No, but it does, it does look like what one could call an impeller, or some part of a rotating thing for moving, again, either air or water, because, why else would the fins be there except to hold up the stalks of the lotus plants you're sticking at it? It's just ludicrous.
It's the bottom of a blender for one of the giants.
Or it's a way to keep oranges separate from the pears. That's what the fins are for. That's why this conventional conventional stuff sometimes does make you just want to crack up, because it is kind of goofy,
really goofy. One of the things that I've, in my looking at material that has come out of Egypt, especially when talking about the high technology, are all of these images of drilled holes, and holes over here and holes over here and holes over here. And even coming out of Peru and some of your material, it's like they got this drilled hole over here and this drilled hole over here. What were they drilling the holes for? Have you seen any evidence that these blocks were joined together and these holes were actually joining pins, or they were part of some kind of a drainage system? Why drill all of these holes?
That's the strange thing, because you find that, you don't find any real pattern with the holes. They sometimes you'll find one in a piece of stone, or sometimes two are the biggest one we found was last March, and it was, what is it? It's about 7 inches in diameter, and the thickness, like, it was a tube drill. And if people don't understand what that means, it is literally a tube. And in modern mining, they use that for drilling cores into stone to find out if there's any, gold or silver or whatever in it. And so the end of the tube has a bunch of diamonds encrusted in it. So the end itself is thicker than the tube, because that's where the diamonds are to be able to do the cutting. But this 7-inch, and it's at least 7-inch in diameter tube drill hole we found, and luckily it was broken in half, so you can see the layers of cutting. It was less than 1/8 of an inch thick, and we had mining engineers with us from Australia who are accustomed to tools of this nature, and they just looked at it and said, "We don't have technology like that."
But there's not any indicator that these were actually holes that were used as part of some construction of some other project.
No, at this point they're a real mystery. In some cases, they were recycled by the dynastic Egyptians for acting as a door swing. So a stone would be put inside, and then that would be the pivot point. But you literally find them spread out all over the field, especially in this one site called Abu Sir, where there are many of them. And there's no... because the site's been so badly damaged and the stones are thrown all over the place, it's impossible to try to put them back together. But they are what one would call a real smoking gun of obvious technology, which is at least as sophisticated as what we have today, if not more so.
Oh, I think more so. Just speak a little bit about the K-stones and some of the cut work that you find on the pyramids and in some of these other sites that is very reminiscent as far as fit-wise to what you find in Peru.
Well, we're fortunate in that some of the casing stone, and that means the outer layer of the Great Pyramid and the other pyramids, are still intact. And so the tightness of the fit of those casing stones are so close that you cannot fit a human hair in between in the joint. And again, how that was done and why they would bother is a great question. And you find the exact same thing in Peru and to some degree Bolivia. These walls where literally you can't fit a human hair in the join, and the walls are 3 to 6 feet thick, and they're not hollow in the inside. That perfect joinery goes from one end to the other. Again, probably defies modern technology.
Probably? Just probably?
Well, I like to be conservative and say probably. I mean, Chris Dunnigan, who's the great engineer, when he's asked, could we do this work today, he would say yes, but why would we bother? Like, we don't need tolerances of 2/10,000ths of an inch from laser perfect on a surface. It's crazy. But these people, whoever they were able to do it, and that was their state of the art at the time.
But again, it really doesn't explain, unless they were like a group of really OC people that had to have it perfect, they could have just put some, Bondo in there.
Oh, I know.
We're good. Anyway, let's talk a little bit, since we're kind of talking about the finishes, about the pyramid at Menkaure. When I look at pictures of that, it reminds me of Cusco with the kind of knobs sticking out of the rocks. Did you notice that as well?
Oh, definitely. And that's something, that some people will be acquainted with. Some of the walls in Cusco and outside of Cusco, which are, again, these polygonal, in some cases, multi-ton blocks fitting together perfectly, they have these weird protrusions on them, which are knobs. And you see exactly, as you said, on the, what's called the third pyramid, which is the smallest one of the three on the Giza Plateau. You have these knob projections, and they don't appear to have any pattern that we can make out, aside from looking like Braille or something. So the mystery is, why would these two, in these two completely different parts of the planet, both showing signs of lost ancient high technology, why are these knobs there? And nobody so far can properly explain, what they were for.
In one image in your book, see, I'm just going to keep plugging it here, Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt, there was an image of this pyramid, and on one part you could see the rough stones with the knobs, very reminiscent of Cusco. And then there was an area off to the left-hand side where it looked like it was the stones that they had like carved the case stones out of these stones that were all rough-hewn with the knobs. Is that what happened, or am I just misinterpreting that image?
Oh, I don't have the book in front of me to look at it.
Sorry. And
that's okay. But it actually could simply be the weathering as well, because we see on the casing stones at the Menkara Pyramid and the Great Pyramid and in other areas that the amount of weathering is so excessive that, again, that could be an indication of extreme antiquity being much older than the dynastic period.
Good point. Someone had brought up the point that, how do I want to phrase this? That so if the pyramids, when they were built, had casing stones, and it was just in the last couple of thousand years that the casing stones were removed, does it seem congruent with the amount of weathering you see on those limestone blocks that make up the outside of the pyramid? Does the amount of erosion that is there, does that seem congruent with the amount of time it's been exposed to the elements?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. There is what's called the Sphinx Temple, which is in front of the Sphinx, and the Valley Temple, which is off to the right. If you're looking, if you're looking the way that the Sphinx looks, those blocks, which are multi-ton, were cut out of the bedrock in order to produce the Sphinx. So it wasn't like whoever cut the Sphinx out was there with an axe or a bunch of axes hacking away and just removing chips to produce the body. These multi-ton blocks were removed, and then temples were created from them. The other really interesting thing, which again Stephen Mailer and others believe, is that the pyramids on the Giza Plateau are so ancient that they were built before this cataclysm, and it was the cataclysm itself that shook the casing stones off the surface of the pyramids, and that later people simply went and harvested that which was on the ground. They didn't actually pull the casing stone off the pyramids themselves.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really, because when you look at how they're put together, I think it would be challenging to get them off.
It would be, and the most impressive one, and people can look this up again on the internet, is look at the bent pyramid, and you'll notice that only the blocks from the corners are missing. That because the casing stone is still quite intact on the rest of the surface. And so, according to engineers, they've told me that if there was a huge, like 9.9 earthquake or something, that naturally the corners would blow out before the flat surfaces would. So again, that may be another indication of this ancient cataclysm. Also, the second pyramid, which they call Khafre, but I prefer to use Great, Second, and Third Pyramid rather than the Egyptian names. But if you notice, the top of it still has its casing stone, so it's as if the pyramid was shook so hard that the casing stones blew off, and it just so happened that the ones on the top were solid enough that they're still in place.
Have they found any of the capstones?
No, and some question as if there ever were capstones or not. And if there were, some theorize they were gold, so they, of course, would have been plundered.
Okay, so this question's come up a couple of times, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it. And this is from Carol, and someone else asked the same question before the break. Does Brien think there is a treasure trove or, the Hall of Records between or beneath the paws of the Sphinx?
Great question, and answer is hopefully quite intriguing. And that's that when Dr. Schock, Robert Schock, the geologist, who has estimated the age of the weathering of the Sphinx to be at least 10,000 years old, and he's been backed up by 200 geologists from around the world, they did echo sounding in front of the Sphinx, and they found these hollow areas. But nobody would allow them to do any excavation. But when we were there in March, there is a walkway that goes down that's made out of wood. And there's now a platform in front of the paws of the Sphinx. And if you look at it, you notice that it's made out of giant panels that can be removed. And that's kind of interesting. So I asked our guide, Mohammed Ibrahim, what's this? And he said, late at night, sometimes they see lights up on the plateau, and what they can do is they can take the decking off, and that gives you access to the system of tunnels and chambers under the Sphinx. So they've already found it. They've already excavated it.
I feared they had excavated it a long time ago. That was my feeling. Once they found it, it was gone. Okay, we have another question. Do you draw any comparisons to Edward Lee Scallion? I guess he's the Coral Castle guy, and the pyramids being built in an occult fashion?
Yeah, I think so, because from what I've heard, what he kept saying, the little he would ever speak, because he was very secretive, is that he knew the secret of the pyramids. And so what he knew is he knew how to neutralize gravity, not be able to necessarily levitate blocks, but he knew how to match the frequency of the stone to be able to render it to be as light as styrofoam. And that is probably also the technology that the ancient pre-dynastic Egyptians had to be able to cut and move these giant blocks effortlessly.
I mean, you don't think they just had a bunch of people and a ramp and whips and that whole thing? No?
No. No, because whoever did the work had to be the finest of engineers, and there would have had to have been a lot of them. So this idea that slaves are doing meticulous craftsmanship, being whipped and not being fed, is like somebody, the equivalent would be someone trying to make a beautiful grand piano while being whipped and not being fed. You can't do it. So that again is a complete fallacy, and we see that time and time again in depictions in Peru, depictions of Stonehenge, where you have these guys in loincloths dragging a rock, with tree trunks underneath, and some guys pointing the direction for it to happen. It didn't happen that way.
Well, and then there's the whole thing that the pyramid or the Great Pyramid got built in 20 years. Which is the biggest joke.
Yeah, because some have calculated that if it was done in 20 years, and because the Great Pyramid by itself is composed of 2.3 million multi-ton stone blocks, each one would have to have been cut, moved, shaped, lifted, and put into place perfectly every 2 minutes.
And that's without having any little calamities. Like, they didn't let me push the cart because it would have crashed into something, and then they'd have like a chip in the stone, and then you'd have to take it back, and they'd have to make a new stone, and it would take more than 20 years.
Yeah, that's again, you ask an engineer if that's plausible, and of course they're going to break out laughing.
Let me ask you this question. Okay, so there's the inside stone, the inside limestone, and then there's the casing stone, which I guess is limestone too. Anyway, I had a great question, and now it just totally left my mind when I went on this whole rock thing.
Well, is it the difference in composition of the interior limestone and the exterior limestone?
That was part of it, yeah.
Okay. Well, the limestone of the core is from the Giza Plateau, and the casing stone, which is much finer, it's almost pure calcium carbonate, I think. It's called Tura limestone, and they're still working that quarry many miles away from Giza, on the other side of Cairo. So that was done intentionally. The interior stone is full of different minerals, and so as far as I can tell, it's able to conduct electricity, whereas the Tura, which is the exterior casing stone, is pure, so it acts like an insulator. So again, you're getting a hint that these were energetic structures and that the outer casing wasn't just for beauty, it was to insulate the working energy in the core of the pyramid itself.
Do you think they would ever try to fix the pyramid, recreate the pyramid back to the shape that it was in to see if it actually did do something?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Number one is that so many academics strictly adhere to the idea that the dynastic Egyptians constructed them 4,500 years ago. That's number one. Number two, it would cost an incredible amount of money, and I don't know who's going to finance that. And number three, I think they're best left the way they are, because that gives us much more of an ability to be able to study them. Being able to look at part of the interior is kind of important, because that way you can see the composition. If you seal the whole thing off and make it look pretty, then that makes it, something from Disneyland and no longer something that you can scientifically study. So the same thing, fortunately, with places like Machu Picchu in Peru. It's in the state that it was found 100 years ago, so it shows you exactly how it was constructed. If you try to rebuild it, you're going to wind up making a bunch of mistakes because you don't know how they did it in the first place.
And we definitely couldn't get that kind of tolerance. That's for sure. No. Okay, so American Road Warrior has asked this question. What earth changes would be in the way of the pyramids being, say, 1 million years old, or some far extended in our past age?
Well, again, I do come from a scientific background, and so I like to be conservative with questions like that. What we do definitely know is there was a global catastrophe that happened 11,700 years ago. It could have been plasma ejection from the sun, according to Robert Schoch. It could have been a comet that either came close to or hit the Earth. That's according to Barbara Hand Clow. Or it could have been a plasma ejection from galactic center, and that's the theory of Paul de Laviolette, but they all agree on this almost exact same time frame. So what I believe is that those structures and some structures in Peru and Bolivia are minimum 12,000 years old, but exactly how old is yet to be determined.
But if the catastrophe happened at that point in time, I mean, it's kind of like Göbekli Tepe. We know when it was buried, but we really don't know when it was built. So if there was a catastrophe and it was abandoned, or all the people died, and then the Egyptians came and found it, it's still saying that it predated that by some period of time. We don't know what, but some period of time.
Well, it throws it pushes back sophisticated humanity or something else at least twice as old as what we've been taught in school. We're taught that Egypt and Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley were the first great civilizations, again, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And now we have definite evidence that we can extend that at least to 12,000, if not more. And that blows up history, or opens it up to reality, which is important for us.
What's your thought on the Bosnian pyramid? Pyramid, not pyramid, undetermined?
Myself, I would say undetermined, because I haven't been there, and I don't like to have an opinion unless I've physically been to a site. I've heard from some experts that they're completely natural, and yet others insist that they are man-made. So I've been invited by Dr. Sam, who oversees the Bosnian complex, to go and visit, and I won't have an opinion until I actually set foot there and am able to look at them myself.
I would really like to get your opinion on that. You'd be a good person for that one. But I know that they have gotten some radiocarbon-14 dating from a leaf or a stick that was actually buried and recovered from just above the surface of one of the sides of the pyramid, and it dated back to like 25,000 BC, something like that, or 25,000 years ago, which really, to me, fits into this whole timeline.
Yeah, well, that could be, and I would like to see them at some point in time. So definitely, if and when I go, I shall report back to you.
Well, okay. See, we just need to put out, Brien and I are totally open to someone that's like totally rich adopting us and treating us in the lifestyle in which we'd like to become accustomed, which would include going to all of these ancient sites and doing, book reports. We would do that.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Why do they need to have another house when they can finance us?
That's right. Okay, we have another question from Bill in New York, and this is a great one. Were all of the pyramids around the globe connected as far as technology used or construction methods?
That's a great question, and I would say no. The Great Pyramid and other pyramids in Egypt are, I think, by far the most sophisticated. I've been to some of the ones in Mexico, and they're beautiful buildings, and big and gorgeous, but they're not really that well made. There are many pyramids in Peru along the coastline made of adobe mud or brick, and they originally would have looked gorgeous, but now they're like decaying, like a cake that's been left outside too long. But it is quite possible that they were connected through what is called the energy earth grid system, because they're all strategically located in specific places. They didn't simply say, Bob, build me a pyramid over there. They're built intentionally in very specific sites. So at one point in time, many of them may have been energetically connected by different cultures.
All right. Pregnant pause. Sorry, I have to really stop looking at the chat room thing because I'm like looking for questions and then I get really distracted. Let's go back to your findings in Egypt. If you were to pick one piece of evidence that you found there, what would you say was the most compelling?
The boxes in the Serapeum. Because, again, they weigh 90 to 100 tons. Chris Dunn, again, he contacted stone manufacturers in the United States and said, sent them a picture and said, I have an infinite amount of money, and I would like you to make one of these for me, and none of them were able to give him an answer of that they were able to do it. The one that said that they had, that they would attempt to do it, said the only way we can make a box like that would be 4 sides, a bottom, and a top. There's no way we can make it out of one piece of stone. It doesn't matter how much money you have. We can't do it.
See, that's just amazing to me. It's just for a reason that we have no idea what for.
Yeah. Obviously something to do with energy, acoustic energy, or some other kind of energy, because the stone, again, was either diorite, which was brought from Central Africa, or granite, which was brought from Aswan. So whoever constructed, or cut, I wouldn't say constructed them, cut them, brought them from enormous distances for the specific special properties of that stone. And in general, the stone is very high in quartz, which means that it's piezoelectric. So, we're almost looking at science, or we're looking at science fiction kind of stuff. Who were these people, and how the hell did they do this work? Mm-hmm. It also is humbling, which I think is good, because it means, again, that we're not the highest level of human evolution. Somebody came before us and did stuff that makes us, shake our heads.
And the why is lost to us.
Very much so.
I mean, there is techniques that were done by the Greeks and the Romans that we know what they did. We know how they constructed it. And if we needed to, we could reproduce it, because that information has not been completely lost. But all of the information, and it's not just in Egypt, it's the same thing in Peru, it's just gone. And you ask the indigenous people, well, how did you do this? And they don't know, because they didn't do it, or it's just gone.
No, that's true. And, in the case of the Greeks and the Romans, they were wonderful at sculpting marble, and marble is a soft stone. So they did beautiful stuff, but it's when you get into super hard stone like granite and basalt and diorite that it's like, wow, why and how? Also, at the end of this tour, we're going to Baalbek in Lebanon, which will be surreal, because that's where you have, stones which weigh 1,200 tons, and that's going to be a wonderful 4 days.
So is there anything else there? I mean, there's the giant stones, there's the one that's in the dirt, whatever, the field. And then there are the 3 or 4 that are actually in the Temple of Jupiter. Mm-hmm. And then what else is there? Anything?
Well, the great thing is that they've just been recently excavating where the big one is, that's, most of it's sticking out of the ground. And there's one beside it which is bigger, and they think there's one underneath it which is even bigger. And what you definitely see even from photographs is, of course, the Romans were there and they built stuff on top of it. But like we were discussing much earlier, a temple, like an ancient temple in general, is built on an older structure, which is more sophisticated. And you even see that if you look at photographs around Athens, is that the Parthenon is built on top of a megalithic structure. So the Greeks built something on top of something older, just like the cathedrals of Europe were built on top of ancient sacred sites that were much older. And you see that in Peru, and where churches are built on top of Inca stuff, and the Inca stuff is built on something older and more profound. So that's another intriguing thing to look at globally.
Well, and I think that as far as Baalbek is concerned, how they moved it is amazing. It's one of the top 10, top 5 largest stones that have ever been quarried and transported. And here's a little tidbit for the listeners, I'm just going to share this, is that there is a stone that's in Russia that at first weighed 1,500 tons when it was quarried. And for them to move it 3.5 miles, 3.5 miles, It took 9 months, 400 men, and they had some kind of a rail system that they moved it on. 9 months, 400 men, 300 miles. And we're talking some of these other stones, Egypt, Peru, that they were comparably as big with less technology, that they moved over bigger distances.
And the ones in the cases you're talking about interlock with almost perfection.
Or in the case of Bellback, they're like 20 feet in the air.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can't wait to go to, that's a really amazing place, which, there are some photos on the internet and a bit of video, but to actually be there will be phenomenal. And so I may be able to write a book about Baalbek by itself, just because there isn't that much that's been written about it, aside from the fact that the Romans were there and did some stuff.
Well, and I didn't know that they were doing any excavating there. That's kind of exciting, because it seems like that location hasn't been touched since the Romans.
Yeah, and actually the excavations, I think, are still ongoing, and they started a few months ago. So we're talking, fresh evidence.
I wonder if they'll let you get close to the site.
Well, if they don't, then I'll fly the quadcopter over top of it.
Any idea of who is doing who's the archaeologist in charge or whatever?
We'll find that out beforehand. We still have plenty of time. I believe it's a German crew, Germans or Russians, or Germans and Russians, and we'll see. Some archaeologists are very nice and open to outsiders coming and sharing, their discovery. Mm-hmm. But again, when in doubt, I'll fly my little quadcopter over top and have a look. But I think we'll definitely be able to see what's recently been going on and see what else is there too. Or not the problem, but in general, when you have something famous like that and people talk about the trilithon, which are these three big stones, and then the ones sticking out of the ground in the quarry, they don't look around the area and see that in fact there's a lot more. And that's definitely the case in Peru when people talk about this structure, and then you walk like 500 feet and then you go, wait a second, this is part of that structure. So there's always more than what is generally perceived.
And I think in the stones that are in the Temple of Jupiter, there are actually some holes drilled in them.
A lot, yeah.
Which would be really interesting based on your work in Peru and your work in Egypt, to see if they were cut with the same kind of technology.
Yeah, exactly. And they're also like these square peg holes, and again, it's only when you're on the ground and walking around do you see not only the scale, but then you start to really look at the nuances, especially if you have spent time in either Peru or Egypt or both, because your eye becomes trained at looking at anomalies rather than having the tour guide tell you, that so and so the Roman decided to build this. You look. Especially looking at the foundations, because the foundations are the oldest part, and they tend to be the most sophisticated aspect.
With the biggest stones, with probably the most finely carved elements to them.
Right. Or at least the finest original precision. You'll have a lot of weathering involved, but you'll be able to get a hint in terms of what the original builders were doing, and hopefully get an idea of what kind of technology was used to do the actual of the material itself.
Brien, I could talk to you forever and ever and ever and ever, but we're running out of time, and I want you to share again with the listeners about your tour and where they can get information. And we have, maybe 4 minutes?
Oh, sure. Well, again, my website is hiddenincatours.com, and on it you'll find links to videos, photo sets I've done. I just recently started a blog, so I have about 200 entries into that of interesting places, not just in Peru and Egypt, but anomalies around the world. And then my YouTube site, which is Brien Foerster, I have 760 videos, I think, so far. I do a new one approximately every 4 days, and now that I have my magical quadcopter, I've been able to fly over a number of ancient sites in Peru, and that'll give the listeners a perspective of places like Ollantaytambo or Sacsayhuaman or Pumapunku that they haven't seen before, because we were given permission from the director of each site to use the quadcopter. And so they'll get to see things that they've never seen before. And, of course, the tours are on the website as well. So I just hope anyone who's interested will have a look at it. And if they should choose, we are going to Egypt March 8th to 21st, and then on to Baalbek in Lebanon right after that. And we still have space, so please come if you can.
Who all are the tour guides for this adventure?
Well, Stephen Mailer, who you've had on, who's an expert on ancient Egypt, and also Patricia Awian, and her husband Yusuf. Yusuf's father was Abdel Hakim Awian, who was the most famous tour guide in Egypt for more than 60 years. And they carry not only the heritage of the pre-dynastic Egyptians, but also most likely are descended from the pre-dynastic Egyptians, and they are a wonderful group of people. And our main tour guide, official tour guide, is oh man, I just forgot his name, but
that
he's
guy.
Yeah, but it's all on my website, and we do this tour. I only do the tour once a year, but I will probably do it every year for the rest of my life, just because Egypt is one of the most fascinating ancient places on the planet.
Yeah. I have one quick question. We have 1 minute. They were doing a bunch of construction work, and it looked like on a main street in Cusco. Have they found a bunch of stuff? Have they been kind of digging around in there?
Oh, yeah. I went there. Well, it's actually 5 blocks from where I am right now, and they found staircases going down, some megalithic work, and it was quite intriguing because that was the main road of the Inca coming into the city of Cusco. So clearly it's a pre-Inca road. And unfortunately what happened was, because it was a main road and was creating so much traffic problems, that they reburied it about a month ago. So it's now covered in asphalt.
Did anybody at least get the opportunity to document it? Sort of? A little bit?
Oh, yeah. A number of Peruvian archaeologists were there. I photographed and filmed it, I think, 3 different times. I mean, it's really intriguing. The staircase is really amazing because it just seemed to go down into the ground. But
to China.
Well, it could be. and there's so much rubble at the bottom that who knows how deep it goes. But unfortunately, is that ancient Inca confronts 21st century traffic, and they had to rebury it.
And traffic wins. Brien, I need to go. The music's going to be coming up. Thank you so much for coming on. It's always, always, always a pleasure, and we need to not make it so long for the next time.
Well, we certainly can't have it be a year and a half from now.
I know.
And you will have to come to Peru when you can.
I'm working it. So, okay, Brien, I'm going to let you go. There's the music, and you have a great night, great weekend.
Always an honor. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. Bye-bye, Brien.
Bye.
That's Brien Foerster. His book is The Lost Technology of Ancient Egypt. His website is brienfoerster.com, and Hidden Inca Tours. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and we will be doing our first show of the new year, where we'll have Michelle Avanti having an astrological look at 2015, and John Hogue back on talking about predictions for the new year. Until then, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember, it's all just energy.